This reading is code number V633. It is the next in a series of readings in Voyager Project number 6. This reading stems from the topic title Colors and Their Influences, and it is comprised of a series of questions submitted by the Voyagers having to do with the experiences of Peter in the tape number V630 as told to us by Lama Tsang. Number 1. Were all the entities Peter met on this journey, with the exception of Abe, still in physical bodies, or were they aspects of himself from this world and or from alternate existences? Or were they entities at the same level of spirituality as Peter? Was Abe at the same time both a guide and a personality on Earth? Number 2. After Peter passed from his physical body and then through the veil of darkness, at what point on this journey does he stop seeing the planet Earth and anything from the physical realm? When Peter started to inquire about where he was, did he ask at any point if he was in heaven? And how did Paul respond? Number 3. At the point where Peter fell asleep because he was at his level of highest acceptance of his consciousness, does this mean he cannot go any further without reincarnating again? Or else, how can he go on to full awareness? In other words, if he doesn't have to reincarnate, what happens next? Number 4. Are Peter, Paul, and Abe associated presently in other incarnations? And are they a part of the Lama Tsang group? Number 5. Some people say they cannot meditate as they only fall asleep. Is this because they relax and the body really sleeps, or have they quickly reached the point Peter did, where he, quote, moved within himself for a period of balance, end quote? Trying to relate the experiences of Peter to Monroe's levels, that's Robert Monroe, I suspect that he has moved through the 10 state to the 12 state and may be moving to the 15 state when he has fallen asleep. Can such a correlation be made? What are your comments? In movement out of body, are there places that one is drawn to and places that one likes to rest? Would you please talk to us about rest points in eternity? As an aside, for those of you who aren't familiar with Robert Monroe's work, the numbers that have been stated in the question are sort of indicators of levels of out-of-body accomplishment, levels of altered states of awareness, and the increase in the number value indicates a, generally speaking, more distant or higher accomplishment. And that's certainly a greatly paraphrased commentary. It's some fascinating work that Mr. Monroe has done. Number 7, and the following questions generally have to do with the transitional experience. Number 7, Lama Tsang, you mentioned that Peter has completed a lifetime without any karmic baggage to accompany him. Would the transition process have been different had there been a lot of karmic baggage? I can envision people carrying his bags here, can't you? Some days I feel like I'm going to need a lot of porters when I leave. Can you please elaborate on this so that we can move towards living our lives without accumulating more karmic baggage? Number number 8. And again, let me point out that all of these questions have been combined to a great degree to form composite questions, summarized from an array of questions generally kind of circulating around the same theme. So if you are one of the Voyagers who have submitted questions, you should find the essence of your question in these composite questions I'm reading. Back to number 8. I work with people who are dying, and I believe she's a member of what's called a hospice program or something like that. And it seems quite apparent that people can choose their moment of death, whether they are alert or comatose. Can we choose our moment of death? In our work, we suggest that families say goodbye and tell the patients that they love them and that it's okay to die. Some people can do this and some cannot. Should we continue to suggest this? Number 9, Peter felt a tug on his upward progression when Abe was grieving for him. Sometimes family and friends cannot get over their grief or sense of loss and may continue to tell the patient, "Don't give up, keep fighting, I can't live without you," etc. How does this affect the person who has passed over and the material process of death? Some people mourn for years and years, especially if they've lost a child. Is there a mechanism to release the deceased person from that? What about the effect of mass grief on famous people? Example given, Elvis Presley. People just can't seem to leave him in peace. Number 10, we in our work often encourage people to take their pain medication regularly and sufficiently so that their pain is relieved. We feel that once they are pain-free, they may be able to let go and make the transition peacefully. Is that okay, or is it against any natural laws in some way? What more could or should we be doing? Are there any methods or techniques that could be learned to help a person make the transition from the physical body to the spiritual without fear or pain? How different would Peter's journey have been if he were in pain or had no friends or family members present or not present? Would the route be the same and with an accompanying guide? I might point out that these questions on this topic came from all over the United States and Germany. Number 11, recent studies of near-death experiences indicate a bright white light to be followed and a summary of life experiences to be reviewed. As this was not mentioned in the reading, does it occur on transition or only for those returning to consciousness after the, quote, near-death, end quote, experience? Number 12, coincidentally, I guess, a person who had played a very big part in my life made the transition on the very day this reading was done. She's referring to 6:30. Therefore, I am feeling a close affinity to the material. About 3 or 4 nights after he had left the earth, I had a very strange night. I seemed to never, quote, go under, end quote, but stayed just barely below the edge of sleep, feeling that I was aware all night long. And strangest of all, I felt this wonderful sense of anticipation, as though something wonderful were going to happen. I have likened it to the night before Christmas when we were children. You can barely sleep for anticipating the wonders ahead. Question: does this experience relate in some way to the passing of this man from the earth? Does it perhaps relate to Peter's situation when he is at a place where colors are blended, though separate, pastel, and he sees the entities on the mound? One of them raises his hand and waves, then nods, turns, and goes in a different direction. Paul tells him that this is, well, she writes his guide. I believe it's stated that Paul or Abe was a guide, but I think to those people that were with him. I could stand to be corrected on that. You tell us that this was the spirit of his friend Abe. Could this relate to my experience? Were our souls communicating during this time? Was the message being given to me that all was well with this man, or was something else entirely happening during that night? Though I felt I hadn't slept all night, I wasn't tired or sleepy the next day, but continued to feel the anticipation, the happiness that had been with me all that night. Quite an experience, huh? Number 13. The following questions have more so to do with the cloak. What kind of emotions or state of mind creates what kind of colors or vibrations in the cloak that we are wearing? What are the more desirable colors, or must one work on all colors, i.e. rainbow, alike? Or is that each person's choice? But to become perfect, perhaps one works on developing a perfect blue, and so on. Does each individual perceive the same color in the same way? In other words, I see Peter's cloak as green, but someone else sees or perceives it as blue, depending on when or from what point I perceive. 14. Does one earn certain colors through various activities and experiences for our cloaks? For example, an adept in meditation might earn the color purple in their cloak. Number 15. Sort of like Scout merit badges, isn't it? Forgive me. 15. When Paul provided the envelopment for Peter, what does this protect him from? The sea of faces? Is the experience of, quote, envelopment, end quote, as done by Paul to Peter, something we all experience? Number 16. If an individual forms a cloak of spiritual consciousness around him or herself, then does any grouping, example given, family, nationality, race, creed, and the planet, also create a cloak around themselves? Can the cloak limit us in any way? Number 17. Can we learn to consciously work with our cloak of light while still in the earth, to make changes in our psyches and move towards mental and emotional healing? While in the earth, it would seem more effective to work directly with the emotion than the light. Those are the extent of the questions I have for this point, for this reading. And so now we prayerfully and thankfully present them to you, Father, praying that you would guide us to that which you would know to be the very best. A special blessing on those souls who are serving with us in other realms. Thank you, Father. Amen. Yes, we have the channel then, and as well those references which apply to the topic, questions, and inquiring minds as have submitted same. Father, we thank Thee for guiding us in this work, that we might herein accomplish Thy will and purpose. We pray and call upon Thy light to embrace all those souls in all realms that are presently in the darkness of some need, and for whom there are none illuminating the way. Humbly, joyfully, we thank Thee, Father, for this wondrous opportunity of oneness with Thee and our brethren in the earth. Amen. It should be noted here that some of the inquiries now before us have to the greater or lesser degree been addressed in the earlier information as has been given, and has not as of this point in your time been heard by this our channel. The relationship between the entity Peter and those entities met or observed during the proceeding from the earth to the realm of his spiritual sleep were not aspects of himself. Neither were they as such alternative existences. They were and are entities whom are at that or those levels of consciousness for the purpose of resolving some issues or works which yet remain therein for them. The exception here being, of course, Abe, whom is and was as such a worker in those realms. See? Abe can be both a guide and an expressed entity in the earth because of his spiritual stature. Abe has no karma to fulfill of an individual soul need or purpose in the earth. Therefore, at some level of his spirituality, he is conscious of his multiple expressions. See, we told you there were exceptions. Abe is one of them. See? In essence, Peter stopped seeing and being aware of the earth and its more broad influences almost immediately upon departure from the earth. Though his sensory perception was still functioning and his attitude of expectation was still earth-oriented, and even is at this moment as we speak, he was, as given, nearly immediately uninfluenced by sensory perceptions from the earth, the exception being those emotions which remained somewhat unresolved or needed additional balance. We can't find any indication here of him inquiring of Paul whether he was in heaven or the opposite place. Actually, you see, those connotations are more so earthly oriented. There is only, as one passes from the earth, the awareness of a sense of being alive. In other words, there is so much of a concentration and focus upon the fact that existence continues. Most entities don't have the wherewithal, we believe would be your term, to think about asking that question. Isn't that odd? Especially since it's such an important one while they're in the earth. Here again there are some exceptions, and ironically, it might seem to you, these are more often than not those heavily steeped in dogma or religious rote or such, and very often those whom fill roles of leadership in such capacities. They are much more conscious of what they call error or sin, see? The mental, emotional, spiritual attitude of the entity upon departure from the earth has much to do with an entity's immediate reactions here. And so this, you see, is a tempering influence to the experiences that are perpetuated and the actions and reactions that occur on the part of entities whom are, quote, new arrivals, end quote, just a colloquial term from here, see? The level of spiritual sleep and the term level of high spiritual acceptance does generally have to do with that point in consciousness. It doesn't mean that there's a rigid ceiling upon where they can go and can't go. It's more so of certain constraints holding them back, an inability to function at these other levels, rather like an entity rising to high altitudes geographically in the earth and finding difficulty in breathing for the first several days of residency there. After that they make adjustments and change habits and or schedules as were previously in place from the lower altitude levels. See? How he can go on to full awareness? Well, that's ahead. You'll hear about that when we return to Peter. See? Peter, Paul, and Abe are not associated presently in other incarnations. They are not in multiple levels of existence carnally, physically. They are expressed on multiple levels of consciousness, but not physically and not in the specific individualized sense as the question infers. Abe, of course, as we've given it, you know about. Paul has a broader range of awareness than Peter at the moment. Peter is changing, though, as you'll see. Yes, they are a part of our grouping, as you suspected. The differentiation between meditation and falling asleep can at times be a very fine line, for as one enters into the sleep period, they are as free or fluid to move about from their physical body as they are in meditation. Very often the sleep time movement is even freer and less limited. However, at the same time, it is influenced by other factors, and what you call lucid dreaming doesn't seem to be as commonplace in the earth as yet as it might be. See? In a sense, the falling asleep during meditation is reaching a stage or resting point, and that resting point does have an impact upon the body-mind connection to the spirit, and so the memory is placed into a rest state, and therefore the true experience as it is encountered is still there, but the recall of it hasn't registered in the earth consciously. It's in the registry of the subconscious, however. See? So in a sense, relatively speaking, or comparatively speaking, yes, they have moved within themselves for a period of balance, just as Peter did. And that period of balance can be as productive to them as a meditative experience which is recalled. Such should not be minimized, even though often such entities are disappointed that they merely fell asleep. See? The relationship between the entity Monroe's work and demarcation points in the comparative analyses of Peter's movement are difficult for we to make here. Monroe doesn't visit our group, and we haven't a personal contact with him in the manner which you would expect us to have to answer that question. Why? universal records are subjected to universal law. Were we to delve into those records as applied to the entity Monroe without his approval, we would be in violation of universal law. On the outer extent based upon your willingness to answer and your knowledge, a correlation can be made based upon what you have extrapolated from the experience. The indicators are comparatively close to what you have assessed them. However, don't be limited by those demarcations. Peter can just as well move to 29 in the twinkling of an eye, see? Or beyond, see? There are places where one is drawn for purposes of spiritual rejuvenation or balance. There is an aspect to the spirit which is likened on to a physical sense in the earth, and curiously, it is inversive. In other words, it is the inverse of an aspect. If an entity is without fear, they have the possession of a spiritual sense. That is, in essence, inversely, faith. Faith is a power which creates additional illumination or luminosity to their spiritual cloak. This is adjuncted with yet another tool, spiritually speaking, which we will simply call love. Both of these have connotations in the earth which are somewhat different here. In other words, love here is an expression of the soul's potential, just like your senses, or a moment please. Very well. What's expressed here is that if an entity has sensory perception in the form of tactile movement, they might be particularly skilled at playing the piano or the cello, as one of the Voyagers does. And so therefore, this entity, in an analogy here, in the realm of spirit, might find that the sense of faith enables the entity to move about many different realms freely, fluidly, without interfering with them or being encumbered by them. See? Such levels of, as one could call, rest are precisely where you find Peter at this point. The garden-like area is that which is used by a number of souls, of whom are very active members of our grouping and other groupings as well. This, we'll call it existence, is supported directly by souls in other realms beyond the one we are speaking to you from at present. And this support comes in the form of another spiritual sense, which is called, or has been titled for your understanding, quite simply, grace. See? And so, the law of grace permits the existence of this realm. It is an oasis, a rest area on a spiritual freeway, given with a note of loving humor, though there are many more comforts here than on your rest areas. See? Completing a lifetime without karmic baggage is a matter which is dealt with on the individual level of each soul. The potential for releasing karmic baggage is ever present in front of each of you. Find those things that frustrate you, that anger you, that sadden you, and, ironically, that make you joyful. Explore, understand, and balance these so that you have a state of ease across the breadth and depth of your life, and you will have released your karmic baggage. Things that are exceptions in your life tend to relate most probably to karma. As with all things, there are always those aspects to be looked upon as blessings, the light of your soul, the gifts that you bring in, and those things which are available to all under universal law. Thus, these things as stand out about you or in your life do not necessarily apply under that description. See? People can and do choose their moment of death, even in the case of an accident where it would appear otherwise. Thus you have those who miraculously escape an event which should have consumed their life. Suggesting that entities release other entities is something that should be done all through their life, not just at the moment of departure. To love an entity is not to hold them, to bind them, to cling to them. It's to cherish and nurture them openly in the palm of your outstretched hand. If you admired a lovely songbird in a flowering bush just in front of you, would you think of reaching out and grasping it and clutching it in your hand because you loved its presence and its song so much that you didn't want to let it go? That's the whole issue there. If you hold it a bit too long, you'll harm it, you'll damage it, you'll prevent it from being the thing of beauty that you loved in the first place. See? Yes, continue to suggest this, and even more emphatically, be a bit bolder. The time is in the earth where that's needed, but it's not your responsibility. This should become a way of life, that entities realize that life is eternal. As those whom are to be the preparers of the way are awakened, you'll see this more and more. The tug from Abe was indeed as you have defined it. Tell an entity not to give up, keep fighting, and also that their life will be less brilliant without them. But don't tell them not to give up and keep fighting to stay in the earth, but not to give up and keep fighting, to be joyful and to be as God wishes you and is right for you. And if that includes moving from this realm to the next, then be assured that so as there is purpose and joy for you both, you will be together again. That simple, that straightforward. There is no offering here that can temper the loss of a loved one in the earth. For surely as one gathers the light of joy and happiness from friendship or family or child about them, and that light moves from their presence, would there not be a sense of loss? But the recognition needs to be focused and emphasized upon the fact that that light does not go out nor diminish, but becomes more brilliant as it passes through that veil of separateness between your realm and these. The love which is a part of being together in the earth does not cease. It expands and multiplies. And those moments which are together, ye and those whom are loved, let them be meaningful, and let each moment be as precious, like the bird which might fly from the branch in the next moment. See? Those whom are well noted or famous are protected and preserved in certain ways, and the veil of separateness is a part of that mechanism which protects. When there exists a bond between that entity and one or more entities back in the earth, that is the exception. In the case of an entity whom is notorious, that bond usually doesn't exist on a personal enough level to have impact upon them. So Elvis is in that sense in peace, with the exception that he is having to deal with his own choices and his own experiences in the earth. Encourage entities to do that which is in accordance with their belief. If you counter that belief, then you are attempting to lead them. Offer your suggestions, and if pain medication makes their life in a state of greater ease and tolerance, then that's a suggestion offered from that level. But if you add to this that the pain medication is an aid to transition, that's getting just a bit to the point of leading. You know it, that's sufficient. Entities need to be encouraged to find their own way, but not to be led or forced. Those are the signets, the indicators of a good guide. If Peter had been in pain, he would have remained in the earth. When Peter left the earth, he left the pain behind. In other words, pain and transition are not bedfellows necessarily. Peter experienced pain only when he was briefly in the body. Most of the time in those latter stages he wasn't. That's true of most. Exceptions, of course. Everyone has a family member in the spiritual sense. The power of the presence of those on both realms whom love and care for an entity should not be minimized. This greatly enhanced the movement of Peter, and is a work which should be sought after, desired on the part of all of you. True friendships are one of the best, the greatest accomplishments of any lifetime. If you have a true friend or are a true friend, you have that much more light to make the passing brilliant. This can't be overemphasized here. One of the greatest expressions of true love is being or having a true friend. If each entity entering into a matrimonial relationship sought first as vigorously to develop an attitude of true friendship between their potential mate and self, all would stay together. See? Or they wouldn't have the relationship in the first place. They'd be such good friends, they'd recognize their differences were too great. See? All entities have guides. All entities have guides. Some can refuse them, some choose to ignore them, just in the manner as some choose to ignore the existence of God. But they still have both. Near-death experiences involve the activity of following a path of bright light, because that path of bright light is the soul connection. In other words, that light between the soul and the existence of that soul in physical body in the earth is the bright light that they perceive. In effect, that's as though they move immediately from the earth to the point of spiritual rest or sleep, as Peter did after his side journey, so to say. Peter had the advantage of knowing that he was moving from the earth, and knowing that he was met by a guide, and thus his spiritual awareness was greatly enhanced by those activities. Now, all of you whom are a part of this grouping also know that. So when it comes time for you to come here, to return home in a manner of speaking, you'll have those advantages too. Try to keep them conscious, foremost in your mind. See? The white light is that which is perceived in the state of spiritual sleep. Even though Paul perceived Peter as becoming, in a manner of speaking, inactive, the experiences had by Peter would more closely match those of the near-death experience. See? Generally speaking, the opposite is the consistency of occurrence. Near-death experiences rarely, if ever, have the type of experiences that Peter had, while Peter had the same experiences as they did, but in a different way and accomplished through different procedures. Peter's was and is the more desirable for the attainment of greatest spiritual growth. See, the sleep of spirit can occur at any level, even within the sea of faces, does not necessarily have to occur at the highest level of that realm. But Peter's did. He ascended through that realm and then went into his spiritual sleep. NDEs don't always do that. See? In the inquiry as was expressed with the, quote, coincidentally, I guess, end quote, commentary, we have the following to offer. As we gave just above, the period of sleep or rest is not always, as it would seem to those generally in the earth. The sleep state can be as productive and or as active to the experienced sleeper or worker in the more appropriate sense, as can those well practiced in the activity of OBEs, and as such, your knowledge, your experience, and the information you have absorbed brought you to a point in that time of what we'll call spiritual and emotional change, where those forces which are adjacent to you were able to create an environment which was productive to your soul, your mind, your emotion, and your body. Another way of stating that to you, perhaps more understandable, is because of your efforts to better understand your true nature and your expressions of, in essence, reaching beyond self to higher levels of awareness, this forms sufficient bridge or bridging between the semi-conscious state and the spiritual state to enable the experience to take place. It was and is as the experience you described that Peter had, and so a duality of accomplishments was made, those which you have defined for and from yourself, and those which the entity whom had part in your life also experienced. The entity, perhaps curiously to you, wasn't as bound to the earth in some ways as might be expected, and actually in the last several earth months accomplished much in terms of realizing his more eternal nature, though he wouldn't have nor didn't express it in quite that way. Expectation is a form of joy in the spiritual sense, and as one has expectation, no matter how it is expressed, this awakens the potential of the soul, the spirit. And so as such, you became a vehicle which enabled not only those whom are a part of his grouping or whom are guides to him, but also the awareness and subsequent presence of your own spiritual light to be a lamp to guide his footsteps. Your spiritual cloak and awareness were used to aid him. It was very much like the love and true friendship of Abe to Peter, and the obvious love and true friendship of Paul to Peter. And so between the two realms and the two individual workers, the transition was made possible with considerable ease and some joy as well. See? You should find more frequently now your sleep periods different in ways which will be, we should think, of curiosity and joy for you. See? It's not necessarily desirable to have a certain color in your aura predominantly, as we gave earlier, but rather to be capable of directing thought forms which have as their resulting effect the production of color. In other words, remember, in the next realms, thoughts will become reality very swiftly, and the realization of that will impact your soul all too quickly when you enter those realms. The reaction of those thought forms, as we told you, the heavily embodied red impacted Peter with a jolt, a thud, recall. Well, that emotion, you see, is symbolized by that color. It's not just the color, it's the thought form behind same. Those thought forms exist primarily in that realm because they are associated with the earth plane to that color and therefore that realm or strata. We hope this isn't too confusing. It's quite simple. It only gets complex in the explaining. See? Here's a suggestion. If it seems too complex, experiment with it. Go out and look for one of these colors and ask for guidance for the presence of God's Spirit, and one of those whom are with you will protect and envelop you along with your own envelopment. See? Always remember that when you travel and you are in physical body in the earth, that your life force is one of the strongest and most pure and powerful cloaks that you could ever wish for. See? Affirming its presence amplifies it. See? If you seek to develop a certain perfect blue, there is a good aspect to these, not just because you can turn to others and say, "Did you know I've developed a perfect control over blue in my cloak?" They may look for another table to sit at if you say it too often, we fear. However, what's important in this is, as we gave or inferred earlier, as you exercise or as you develop or use those gifts and blessings that are yours, you become adept at them. and that's desired. So if you can project a colour and work upon a perfect blue, also remember what you are attempting to convey with that. What's the thought form that you are building or projecting with that perfect blue? Just developing the ability to project a perfect blue is likened on to an artist in the earth just putting several blobs of color on a canvas and walking away. Develop a thought form with it. Make a portrait or a picture out of what you are doing. See? Whether it's a monograph or whatnot, be in control, direct the power of your potential. Then it's a good idea, see? Well, if you see Peter's cloak as green, then that means you can see Peter, in which case if you can see Peter, you're not in physical body, and Peter's cloak is green. And that's that. However, if you are in the earth plane, and you perceive the aura on someone else, and it appears green, it may not be. You may have yellow in your aura cast upon, what's that colour? Blue, and you perceive green. While another may not, and they'll perceive blue. And that's that. See, given with a note of loving humour. Perception is all important, but it's not so much a position in terms of where do you sit or stand physically, as much as where does your thinking and acceptance stand or sit. If your acceptance level is high, then you are in control of your spiritual senses. That means that even though you are in physical body and conscious thereof, your ability to control your spiritual senses gives you the ability to see. And therefore you would be looking through what in essence would be a clear cloak, and you would perceive what is. That's what makes seers seers and prophets prophets. They can get themselves and their emotions out of the way sufficiently so as to perceive what is. That's the ticket, see? The question of earning colours for one's cloak that humoured the channel above is not that far from accurate. In other words, look at it this way. If you gain the ability to control thought forms that have to do with, let's say, charity and hope and long-suffering and or forgiveness, these tend to relate to very high levels of energy and oftentimes have to do with the upper chakritic centers and therefore may gain you that certain corresponding color, which in this case approaches the indigo in the spiritual side, or the white or silver or golden in the earthly. The function then of that being essentially, again, the accomplishment of having control. And as you have control, that's evident in your cloak or in your aura. The aura is the physical counterpart of the spiritual cloak and vice versa. And so, therefore, you can find that correlation useful. If an entity has a preponderant, beautiful control over people in the aura, you can be reasonably certain that they have gained some significant spiritual control. An alternative to this possibly is the presence of a highly evolved guide or mentor or some such whom is channeling same to the entity but the end result or conclusion amounts to the same. Generally, you wouldn't find the one without the other. See? The envelopment for Peter in his movement was to prevent an overreaction on the part of Peter from allowing him to be caught in that corresponding colour. The concern here is that the guide has a certain degree of participation with those whom they guide, their chelas, as is called in the Eastern philosophy, and therefore those whom are the flock are one with them. The bonding, you will note, took place early on between Peter and Paul, and as their movement progressed, the spiritual bond between these two entities was quickly reawakened, and so that bond then provides Paul with some latitude and some participation with Peter. Therefore, to protect Peter is no different than Paul protecting himself. He has that right, and in a manner of speaking, that duty. Peter was being guided by Paul and is being guided by him. Therefore, Paul has certain rights under universal law that do not hinder him from stepping before Peter in some instances. Peter has work to do ahead. Paul is the guide to help Peter reach that point where he can realize it and make that decision. And therefore the presence of his cloak is a blessing and protects him from being excessively vulnerable while he is in an accelerated state of growth. Entities in such a state of accelerated growth are subject to or more vulnerable than normal. Entities whom are moving at a lesser pace, so to say, are not subjected to these influences because they are moving only to the extent that they are completely capable of balancing with all around them. Peter's movement was and is much more rapid. See? What's being protected here is the integrity and the right of free will of Peter. He's being protected from the thought forms and those whom are perpetuating same in that area of consciousness wherein you heard the action take place. Paul's cloak remains around Peter even as we speak, even though, as you recall from our report from them, that Peter was off with Zach. Paul's cloak is very elastic. It reaches wherever Peter goes. See? The experience of envelopment is indeed something you all experience, and you do so often. It is also something that you do for others. You do this when you pray, you do this when you care, when you love, when you feel a sense of compassion, not an attitude of interference or whatnot, but of understanding and of love and of support. Compassion, see? The forming of an individual cloak of consciousness, spiritually speaking, around oneself as an individual, a group, a society, a planet, is how can we convey this to you? A moment, please. It's not an option. It's not something you choose to do or don't choose to do. It's there. Once you affirm it's there, it becomes a tool, a part of you, an extension of your senses, your awareness, by which you can do works. The following has been given in response to the second aspect of that question. Yes, a cloak can limit anything which protects and preserves the integrity of that which is within it in the containerized sense. Also limits, does it not? If you limit something from getting into the container, you must therefore also, to a degree, limit that which is within from getting out. Being conscious of the presence of this buffer, as it were, enables you to selectively choose which energies you wish in and which you wish to reflect or transform, i.e., filter in the manner described as with light above, and therefore choose that which is benevolent and useful to you. You also, as you have command of your cloak, have the ability to transform that which comes at you. If a force comes toward you in the form of a vibrational thought or frequency, and you recognize this to be deleterious to you, and in essence in discordant existence with universal law, since it's directed at you intentionally or by the free will act, voluntarily or involuntarily, you have the right to purify it and reflect it back in that pure state. The recipient then will become conscious of this and has the right to choose to accept or reject. They also have the right to reflect it back to you, in which case it's amplified back to you, and since it's good and joyful and in accordance with universal law, you can't lose, can you? Prayers like that, see? As you deal with the forces of emotion and those things which limit you in the earth, you are working with your cloak. As you recognize that you are so doing, you enable yourself the availability of certain tools. It's as simple as having a set of tools in front of you to do works and choosing to ignore them or to use them. You are correct. Better to deal with and work with the emotion, being cognizant of the presence of the cloak, how it functions, and how you can use it as an adjunct, than to simply focus upon building this or that color, or whatnot. The value as we indicated it to reflect and to filter, however, is productive in your evolution. You can use this to rid yourself of excess karmic baggage. That's one of the good tools. See? Very well, we're going to pause a moment here. We'll return briefly. Very well, we are returned and we continue. We invoke our earlier affirmation and prayer and continue in thy name, Father, and we thank thee. Amen. Let us turn to some of the other questions unexpressed by the channel here to the present point. If a soul has consciousness of their intended purpose or spiritual work for an incarnation before coming into the earth, and then presumably after being incarnated awaken somewhat spiritually, and ask themselves one morning, "Now what was it I came here for?" The answer to the question is generally very visible before you. The tendency is to ignore it and to look for something which isn't what's before you. Most of the time, those things which are the elements of your labor are those things which are important to your soul in terms of the individual consciousness. Guidance to attain understanding of the soul's purpose or the greater collective work can be attained best by attuning to that source within and allowing self to be guided by same, perhaps using some of the information given earlier on this topic of Kadis, and that yet to come on the remaining topics, might also be helpful. The potentials that you follow in your life are not by happenstance. Even those which you make, which seem to be just free-willed choices and perhaps not the best ones. Your opportunities follow you, no matter what path you take. You can't take a sharp turn here at this road at age 21 and lose your karmic baggage. It will follow you, no matter how many twists or turns you make in the road of free will on the pathway of life. Karma doesn't need a road map. It's a part of you. Karma is your purpose, your work. Group karma and soul karma are different things. They have much more latitude, but free will choices and voluntary efforts, those abound at every turn. Raise yourself to your higher spiritual consciousness and ask the simple questions. What things would our Lord have me do were he at my side at this fork upon the road of life? One of the first that would be an encouragement to you: dear sister or brother, art thou joyful? How may I serve you to bring you joy? For I love you. See, all good works usually begin within self and spread from there. See, there are life forces on many different spheres in many different levels of consciousness, and that includes the focal point in time and space called Venus. Not in the physical form as you know it. The potential for you becoming aware of this is increasing, and does not necessarily mean that you have to make a transition from the earth physically before becoming aware of it. That's all we can give on that point. It's not our work to be that much involved with that subject matter, as it might collectively be called. Those souls whom are part of that sphere of consciousness are often present here, but not in the form as is their expression there, but in their spiritual form, just like Peter's here, see? It's not so much so that God wishes you back to answer a question which is unspoken, for you've never left. See? Your question presumes that you have departed from God. God doesn't want you back because you haven't left. God wants you to have the highest and best, the most joyful, the most wonderful of consciousness. You and others have chosen paths which have progressively limited that joy. In essence, His wish is for you to become aware of what is being given to you. It's like someone sleeping through their own birthday party. Unheard of, see? Your use to God when you do reawaken is that one entity, joyful alone, is a wonder to perceive. But if there is only one, whom does the perceiving? Two entities are not just twice as joyful, but perhaps 4 times as joyful. 4 entities are so much more joyful that it is immeasurable, not an exponential value, but far more than this, because you need to move in multiple directions or dimensions. And so with the adjunct or addition of each new awakened soul, it's like adding another perfectly tuned instrument to a symphonic orchestra. The depth and breadth becomes even more so inspiring. See? If you feel that you should be doing more in your life, then stop doing what you're doing. Given with a note of loving humor, the question was, I often feel I should be accomplishing more or doing more in life. What you are doing in life, more often than not, will remain in that life. What you are doing in spirit while you are in physical body will go with you no matter where you are. This is not to become idle, or is it laconic or lactonic? Well, colloquially it's lazy, but rather that you would become a balanced entity in the earth, joyfully functioning, knowing that you are not of it. And the greater work that you do at this point of your life is to be the example. If you look for great ways to measure your life, you will find it takes a great effort. But if you look for the little ways to measure great opportunities and actions, you will find it easy. You never know the form or the manner in which the Master might confront you. A weary passer-by, yearning for a smile, a greeting, a confirmation that someone cares. Could that have been the Master yesterday at the counter at your elbow? Could it have been he behind the wheel of the automobile, parked at the same stoplight next to you? And so forth. The one in need is the great opportunity. Those whom aren't in need are blessings. See? You have as the potential a direct communication or link to God. If you choose to allow yourself to realize this, then there are no expressions between you and God. The more so you are unable to accept this, the more likely it is for you to have additional levels or points of demarcation between yourself and God. Follow that? The question was, if we are expressions of God or of our soul, are they direct or are they expressions in between? There often are other expressions in between, but not as individuals. They are sort of like protective envelopments of limitation. Follow that? When 2 or more members of a soul grouping are expressed finitely and physically in the same plane, the potential for the accomplishments of each or both is dramatically enhanced. This has to do with spiritual laws. The elaboration on this is simply the power of reflection. Even though this may be conscious or unconscious, all such forces travel, and as they travel, they impact the thought form in which that existence is being sustained. Therefore, the greater is the light within darkness, the less dark is the darkness. Follow that? There are those guides in the earth whom function like Paul to Peter. Paul has been with Peter and vice versa for much consciousness, a great deal of time. Each entity has for the specific incarnation another entity whom is a counterpart of Paul. Though this may change as entities grow or realize that you might need some different assistance, but generally the guide that is with you, or if that's plural, as it is in most cases, at the time of your entry, remains with you until you return. That continuity and connective link between you is important, and again this approaches a complex subject matter, but what we believe that sufficiently answers your question, does it not? Those whom are of a higher level of spiritual acceptance or consciousness are generally not detectable or visible to those in levels beneath them. This is a graduated thing, you see, and the lower the level or the more finite or dense the vibrations are for that higher consciousness entity, the less visible they are. Visibility then becomes a matter of application of universal law, the request on the part of the less conscious entity to one of a higher consciousness or to God, in which case the changing or altering of the energy patterns, i.e., controlling the energy of their spiritual cloak, Kali, see? Understand that? Controlling the Kali then enables the entity in that realm to perceive them. If that entity is on a realm, for example, which is predominantly red, then lowering or changing the vibration of the spiritual cloak makes the higher consciousness entity visible if that Kali is red. See? Entities perceive what they are willing to perceive in those realms. See? Abe is an entity whom is indeed very beautiful. Abe is capable of knowing that he exists in a multiplicity of expression, though consciously in the earth does not. This preserves the integrity of Abe in that individual expression. Abe can have that consciousness if it's needed or useful or called upon by him. It may come to him in varying form, but it's there. Universal law prevents a bad guy, as this Voyager has questioned, from being a guide. In other words, you can't be a guide and be of lesser vibration than the entity you are guiding. You must be at least equal or higher, and in most instances you need to be one complete level above that entity you are guiding, or at least on the highest possible spiritual level equal to that entity. This means that the entity may have chosen a lesser level of incarnation spiritually, and the guide is at the highest potential for that entity. See? Universal law is like a cloak in and of itself. Universal law is God's spiritual cloak. See? It's around us all. If Peter remained completely unaware of Paul's presence, little difference would be effected, with this exception. Peter would have progressed much more slowly. He would not have had the movement rapidly through the Cadiz, the Sea of Faces, and into his present realm without Paul's assistance. This would have been a slow, measured, and probably involved lateral movement as a pace. See? Inability to recognize the assistance of a guide is no different than inability of being able to recognize someone who's striving to help or guide you in the air. The same, see? A guide is a very handy person with a note of loving humor to have if one is wandering about in the Sea of Faces. That's not a good area to, what's your term, hang about in, to loiter in, see? There are no precise schools of guides with a note of loving humor, though all of existence is a school for guides. Guides are not in that sense an orderly flock, but on the other hand, they are indeed so. The more so the subject is spiritually aware, the more so must the guide then be capable of helping them at least to the next major level of consciousness, which means, in your vernacular, where Peter is now, Paul should be able to take him completely through onto the same parallel level beyond the next spectrum of Cadiz and through the next realm of existence, which Paul is capable of doing. See? Each entity has the opportunity to guide frequently. Being a guide is equally valuable to the soul's consciousness as is incarnating. See? And so then, for the present, we would ask that each of you would think of yourselves as guides, as teachers, to those whom are in need, in your prayer and in your daily actions. And for the present, we shall now conclude. May the grace and blessings of our Father's wisdom illuminate your path and your works. Until next we meet, may the Christ Spirit be a lamp in your heart in these times. Very well then for the present, dear friends.